Thank you, Mr. President, members, and pals. I rise to offer a perspective on this bill. I'm an actual published historian of American democracy, but you don't have to be a historian of democracy to understand that our voting and our elections have always been imperfect. That's the nature of human behavior, and it's the nature of history. We're never going to get a perfect election because we've never had one. That doesn't mean we should make efforts to make them better. But when we think about history, I think sometimes we think too comfortably in terms of progress or evolution. All things used to be awful, but now they're great. That's not the way history works. That's not the way history has ever worked, especially when we think of the history of democracy. Things have gotten better, more inclusive, more democratic, and then they've gotten worse. Things have gone well, and then they've gone poorly, all based on the decisions that people like us made. There's nothing natural about the progress of democracy or about history. It's about human beings making decisions. Human beings like us making decisions in a moment like now. Now take, for example, Reconstruction. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments expanded voting rights, expanded democracy in this country. Maybe some of you don't know, but the first black congressman was elected in 1870. We had 7 black congressmen during Reconstruction. But you know what happened during Reconstruction is federal laws became more expansive and people became more able to participate in democracy. State laws became much more repressive in a number of different ways. So that after Reconstruction, we didn't have another black congressman until 1929, almost 50 years. Reconstruction was a powerful and interesting phase of American history because it was so full of opportunity and potential, and yet simultaneously so full of repression. So while federal laws, like I was just suggesting, became more expansive and more open, at the state level, you had things like black codes, where a person of African descent would have to carry proof that they were employed everywhere they went or they could get arrested. That happened in the South in the 1860s. But something that happened specific to voting rights is just as important. We've all heard stories about grandfather clauses, and the idea that you would have to be able to recite the Constitution from memory in order to vote. That's important. That specific provision is important because on its surface, it seems fair. On its surface, it makes perfectly good sense. Would we hope that every American citizen would be able to know the Constitution well enough to recite it? It looks fair on its surface because it appears to apply to everyone, but in reality, it's not. Democracy is not an idea, it's a practice. The idea of democracy might make us feel good, but the actuality of democracy is much more important, and I hope that we focus our attentions on that today. So I'm not trying to bore you with history, I'm trying to make a point about today. Today we can be so comfortable in the stories that we tell ourselves that we don't put the effort in to find out reality and the practical consequences of the decisions that we make. We find stories to support our feelings and indulge in the arrogance of fear, thinking that others are out to get us. Mr. President, members, I know some Democrats. We are not organized enough to actually create widespread voter fraud. Not out of lack of desire, we're just not competent. I don't think we could manage widespread voter fraud if we wanted to. And here's the thing, close elections happen, and I know that better than most of us in here. As many of you probably know, I won by 315 votes in my election. And when we think of close elections and we think about voter security counted, and we want to be afraid of voting irregularity, but what is more irregular than votes that should have counted not counting? Close votes are decided by the votes we don't count, just as much as they are by the ones that we do. I want to go back to this idea of democracy as an idea versus democracy as a practice or as a real concrete thing. Because like I said before, on its surface, voter ID sounds fair. I completely concede that. On its surface, it makes sense. It really does. But in terms of its actual practical consequences, it is deeply anti-democratic. And that needs to be our focus, not on our ideas, but on the implications for actual living Minnesotans. My grandfather did not fight at the Battle of the Bulge for an idea of democracy. He fought to make it real. Fannie Lou Hamer did not organize for the sake of the idea of democracy. She organized to realize democracy. Voter IDs laws sound fair, but in reality, they aren't. Real fairness respects everyone's capacity for self-determination. Real fairness demonstrates faith in the people and faith in democracy. That's the real fairness to which we must aspire. Voter ID isn't really fair, and we can do better. Mr. President, members, I urge a negative vote.